Hello, math class. It's time to get started with the new chapter, but before we start, I want to make sure that you have reviewed the review and the test, and you have a grade, and you have fixed up any problems that you missed to improve your grade. So I want to make sure that's all out of the way before we start chapter 11. I've also already assigned the pre-skills test. After you successfully complete that, I will assess that and let you know those areas that we need to be careful of in those simple math skills, and make sure that doesn't trip you up. For example, we're still practicing percentages to decimals and multiplying percentages and decimals out. So just be careful of that. Also, on the bottom of 210, there's a tax income table where they're asking you to look at a number and where it falls in between two other numbers. So we'll take a look at that individually as you complete that. So now we're ready to get started on chapter 11, all about taxes. And it is tax season. They've just extended it because of the virus going around, but we're still going through this chapter, and this is information that every American citizen needs to know about their W-2s, their 1099s, how to report your gross income, your federal tax, state tax, local tax, and things like that. So those are some of the vocabulary that they go over on page 212 and 213. I have on the board the things that you need to remember. What is a W-2 and a 1099 form? They list those there on page 212, but you can also Google 2020 W-2 form or 2020 1099 form, and you'll see the ones that are being used today. Very similar to the ones that are in the book, even though they're a little dated. It still has the same information. If I know Ella has been working some jobs. She probably received a W-2 for the 2019 tax year. Your parents all received W-2s, and so forth. The important thing is to look at those forms and read all of those little blue words. You'll see where the earnings or the wages are in that bolded box, as well as the federal tax withheld. Then you have different places for the state tax, local tax, and Social Security taxes to be withheld from your paycheck. So take a look and take time to look over that form, as well as a 1099 form. You can get a 1099 for various reasons, but the one that they're using in the book is interest. A bank will send you a 1099 if you have a certain amount of money in a savings account and you earn interest. You have to report that as earnings or in part of your gross income, and you have to pay taxes on it. So that's for interest, dividends, some other things, but I don't want to confuse you. In this example on 212, they're using that the bank sends you a 1099 for interest earned. So then we need to figure out gross income. Gross income is one of the vocabulary words you need to know, and it is the total of your earnings, interest, and dividends. So at the end of the year, you collect your W-2. If you've only worked one job, you only have one W-2. But if you're working different jobs, you'll collect a W-2 from each employer. And then again, depending on how many bank accounts you have, different places where you may earn interest, you'll get a 1099. So sometimes parents, you may have several of those that you have to add together to do your the end of the year tax forms. And so we want to know how to figure out your gross income. And what you do is you add them all together. All of your wages plus your interest. Your tips is part of your wage. So you're just going to be adding those together. If we look on page 213, it asks two questions. Why are copies of the W-2 and 1099 forms sent to the federal, state, and local tax agencies? Well, your employer has the obligation to take those taxes out of every paycheck and then submit that money in that report to those agencies at the federal level, which means national, USA, state, Pennsylvania state taxes, and then also there's local state taxes in the county or township or community you live in. I pay taxes to East Huntington Township. Other places would be Hempfield, that's your school tax, or your local municipality. So you have state, local, and federal taxes withheld. And those employers send that portion of your paycheck to those agencies with your copies of your W-2 so they know where to apply all of those taxes. Also, number 2, how could you check your W-2 form to make sure it's correct? So when you get your W-2, most people just assume that it's correct. But if you wanted to check it, you would save all of your pay stubs. When you receive a paycheck, there's usually a portion that is perforated that you tear off, and then you cash your check. That portion you tear off has all of the same information as a W-2, particularly to that check. So if you get paid every week, every 2 weeks, or monthly, that when you tear off that perforation part, that information about that check is on that. That's called a pay stub. And my husband keeps those. Some people throw them away, but my husband files those in case there's any discrepancies or we think maybe the W-2 is too high or too low. We can go back to the pay stubs and make sure those are correct. So that's where you would check. You would go back to your pay stubs and add all of those together. Now we're ready to do your practice activities in the book. The first section, you are just going back to page 212 and identifying the federal, state, Social Security, and local tax, and where to find it in each box and putting that number. There's no math involved. You're just finding the amount of money and plugging it in. Remember, on your response sheets in your Jupiter Pod, if it's money, you have to add the money sign and the decimal. So when I'm on the Jupiter Pod, I give you a note to remember that, and I have something that looks like this. That's to remind you that to put it into that format. If your answer is money, you need a money sign and a decimal in the right spot. If the amount is over $1,000, you need to add the comma. If you think you're getting the right answers and you're not putting the correct format in, it'll mark it wrong. I can go in and check those individually, but save me some time and just put the correct format in for me. Money sign, comma if it's over $1,000, in the decimal with the two places for the change for money amount. So just for 1 through 4, you're just plugging in those numbers. Now, for 5 through 10, you're going to find your gross income. Again, the gross income, your wages, your tips, and plus your interest. You're taking your W-2 and your 1099 and adding all those together. So those are simple addition. You can just plug those out in your calculator and add those up, 5 through 10. Then 11 through 16, you're going back and looking at the new W-2 and 1099 from State Bank and Able Manufacturing for Mike Fernando. And you're going to just tell me, again, no math involved, just tell me the amounts, read the forms, the wages, the federal, state, how much interest, gross income, tax, and so forth. Now you will need, on number 17, you will need to do an addition problem because you're adding your wages on the green form and your interest on the blue form together to get your gross income. So you will need to do a little bit of math on number 17. So the first lesson, we're just learning the vocabulary, knowing what your gross income is, knowing the terms W-2 and 1099 forms, and then just realizing where to get the information off of those forms. That's lesson 1. Stay tuned for lesson 2.